There are moments in life when doing nothing becomes impossible, when your conscience won't let you walk away. Sometimes it takes just one person with courage to stand up when everyone else has turned their backs. In the frontier town of Cedar Flats in 1882, folks had learned to ignore the screams coming from Jacob Miller's cabin. His pregnant wife Sarah suffered behind those walls while neighbors pretended not to hear. The nearest lawman was days away, and most people figured it wasn't their place to interfere between a man and his wife. Then a mountain man named Caleb Stone rode into town. When he heard Sarah's cries, he made a choice that would change 3 lives forever. What made this stranger risk everything for people he'd never met? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Caleb Stone had been riding for 3 days when the mountains finally released him into the flatlands. His packhorse carried the winter's worth of furs he'd trapped, along with the pelts of 2 wolves that had been foolish enough to challenge him near his cabin. At 47 years old, he still moved with the careful economy of a man who'd spent most of his life in places where a single mistake could mean death. The high country had been his home for 15 years now, ever since the fever took his wife Margaret and their daughter Emma in the span of a single terrible week. He'd buried them in the spring of 1867, sold the farm in Missouri, and headed west until the mountains swallowed him whole. For a long time, he'd wanted them to, but the mountains had other ideas. They didn't grant him the peace of death. Instead, they taught him how to live with ghosts, how to wake each morning to silence so deep it felt like the world had forgotten how to make sound. His hands, scarred and calloused from years of work, held the reins with practiced ease. He wore buckskin clothing he'd made himself, a wide-brimmed hat darkened by weather and time, and a thick beard shot through with silver. On his hip hung a bowie knife in a worn leather sheath, his father's blade, the one thing besides memories he'd carried from his old life. Strapped to his saddle was a rifle he cleaned every night, whether he'd fired it or not. In the mountains, discipline kept you breathing. The leather journal in his saddlebag had been Margaret's gift to him on their 10th anniversary. She'd wanted him to write about the farm, about their dreams for Emma's future. Instead, it held sketches of mountain trails, notes about game movements, and pressed wildflowers he'd found in high meadows. Sometimes he wrote to Margaret, though he knew she'd never read the words. It helped, somehow, to imagine her listening. Cedar Flats appeared on the horizon like a promise of civilization, though civilization might have been too generous a word. The town consisted of a single main street, lined with weathered buildings that leaned slightly, as if tired from holding themselves upright against the prairie wind. Caleb counted maybe 20 structures total. A general store, a saloon, a livery stable, a blacksmith shop, and various other businesses that served the scattered ranchers and farmers trying to scratch out livings from the stubborn land. He'd been here before, years back, and remembered it as a hard place filled with hard people. The kind of town where folks minded their own business because everyone had something they'd rather keep private. The kind of place where the law was more suggestion than requirement, and a man's word, or his fists, settled most disputes. It was mid-afternoon when Caleb rode down the main street, and he noticed immediately that something felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but off. People moved with their heads down. Conversations stopped when he passed. And more than once, he saw someone glance toward a particular cabin on the edge of town, before quickly looking away. The general store stood in the middle of the street, its sign barely legible after years of sun and wind. Caleb tied his horses to the rail and stepped inside, his eyes taking a moment to adjust to the dim interior. The place smelled of coffee, tobacco, and the peculiar mustiness of dry goods that had sat too long on shelves. Behind the counter stood a thin man with spectacles and nervous hands. "Help you?" he asked, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned not to show too much interest in strangers. "Need to trade these furs," Caleb said, his voice rough from disuse. In the mountains, he sometimes went weeks without speaking aloud. Looking for coffee, flour, salt, ammunition? The usual. The storekeeper nodded, came around to examine the furs. His eyebrows rose slightly when he saw the quality. You do good work. Mountain man? I live up there, Caleb allowed. He didn't much care for talking about himself. As they negotiated prices, two women entered the store. They stopped talking the moment they saw him, offered tight smiles to the storekeeper, and moved to the far end, whispering. Caleb caught fragments. Heard him again last night, and that poor girl, and ain't our business. The storekeeper's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He finished the transaction quickly, helped Caleb load his supplies, and practically pushed him toward the door. Livery's down the street if you need stabling. Martha Jenkins runs the saloon if you need a room. We don't have much, but what we got, we share fair. Caleb studied the man's face, saw fear there and something else. Shame, maybe. Obliged, he said, and left. The livery stable was run by a weathered black man named Samuel, who'd come west after the war. He quoted a fair price for stabling the horses and didn't ask unnecessary questions, which Caleb appreciated. As Samuel led the animals to their stalls, Caleb noticed a young boy, maybe 12, mucking out stalls with fierce concentration. That's my grandson Timothy, Samuel said, catching Caleb's glance. Good boy. Works hard. Timothy looked up, met Caleb's eyes for just a moment, then returned to his work. Something in that brief glance told Caleb the boy was scared of something. Not him, something else. Caleb walked to the saloon as the afternoon stretched toward evening. The building was larger than most, 2 stories, with a painted sign that read Martha's Place in fading letters. Inside, the main room was surprisingly clean, with tables arranged neatly and a bar that gleamed with recent polishing. A woman in her 50s stood behind the bar, her grey hair pulled back severely, her eyes sharp and assessing. You'd be the mountain man who rode in, she said. It wasn't a question. Word travels fast in small towns. Just looking for a room and a meal, Caleb replied. Got both. $2 gets you a bed, breakfast, and dinner. Extra $1 if you want a bath drawn. Martha Jenkins studied him with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades judging character. You planning on trouble? No, ma'am. Just passing through to resupply, then heading back up. Something in his tone must have satisfied her, because she nodded. Room 3, top of the stairs. Supper's at 6. We serve stew on Tuesdays, and today's Tuesday, so you're in luck. As Caleb turned to head upstairs, Martha spoke again, her voice lower. You seem like a decent man. Decent men are in short supply around here lately. If you're smart, you'll keep to yourself, rest up and leave tomorrow. Caleb paused on the first step. That a warning or advice? Both, Martha said. This town's got troubles. Troubles that don't concern you. He nodded slowly and continued upstairs. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand and a window overlooking the main street. Caleb set his gear down, cleaned his rifle out of habit, and sat on the bed to wait for supper. Through the window, he watched the town move through its evening routines. Men heading home from work, women gathering, washing from lines, children playing in the last light of day. All normal, all ordinary, except for that cabin at the edge of town. The one people kept glancing at and then away from, as if looking too long might curse them. Just before 6 o'clock, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Caleb heard it. A woman's voice raised in distress. Not quite a scream, but close. A man's voice followed, angry and slurred. Then the sound of something breaking. Caleb stood, moved to the window. He saw others hear it too. A farmer stopped in the street. A woman on a porch paused in her sweeping. They all heard it, and they all did the same thing. They turned away. They went inside. They closed their doors. The sounds continued for perhaps 5 more minutes, then stopped. Silence settled over Cedar Flats like a shroud. When Caleb went downstairs for supper, the saloon had filled with the evening crowd. Men sat at tables, drinking and talking in low voices. No one mentioned what they'd all heard. Martha served him a bowl of stew that was better than he'd expected, thick with vegetables and meat. A man in his 60s sat down across from Caleb without invitation. He wore a black coat despite the heat, had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and carried the weary air of someone who'd seen too much suffering. Doc Thornton, The man introduced himself. "You're the mountain man?" "Caleb Stone." "Pleasure. Been a doctor here for 20 years. He sipped his whiskey, set the glass down carefully. "Martha tells me you're leaving tomorrow." That was the plan.
Good plan.
"Smart plan." Doc Thornton stared into his whiskey as if it held answers. "Sometimes the smartest thing a man can do is keep riding. Some problems don't have solutions, not ones that a stranger can provide anyway." Caleb ate his stew, said nothing. "But he was listening. There's a man in this town named Jacob Miller," Doc continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's got a wife, Sarah. She's 8 months along with their first child." He paused, his jaw working. "He's not a good man, Mr. Stone, and she's not safe. Nobody in this town is brave enough to do anything about it. We all have our reasons. He's got friends, mean friends. The sheriff's worthless. The nearest marshal is in Fort Collins, weeks' ride away." "Why are you telling me this?" Caleb asked. Doc Thornton met his eyes. "Because you look like a man who might still have some justice left in him. Most of us used it all up years ago, or maybe we never had much to begin with. We've made our peace with being cowards. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder what kind of man I've become. And I don't much like the answer." He stood, left money on the table for his drink, and walked out without another word. Caleb finished his stew in silence. Around him, the saloon filled with forced laughter and conversations that carefully avoided certain topics. He recognized it for what it was. A town in denial, a community that had traded its conscience for an easier life. He went back to his room, took out his journal, and wrote by lamplight. He wrote about Margaret and Emma, as he often did. He wrote about the long winter in the mountains. And then, for the first time in years, he wrote about choice. About the moments that define whether a man is truly living or just waiting to die. When he finally slept, his dreams were troubled by the sound of a woman's voice, crying out in the darkness while the world turned away. Tomorrow. He'd planned to leave, but sometimes plans change. Morning came too early, announced by roosters and the clatter of wagon wheels on the hard-packed street. Caleb woke with the sun, as he always did, and lay for a moment staring at the ceiling. The sounds from last night still echoed in his mind. That woman's voice, the breaking glass, the terrible silence that followed. He dressed slowly, strapped on his father's Bowie knife, and went downstairs. Martha had breakfast laid out, eggs, biscuits, coffee strong enough to strip paint. 3 other men sat at various tables eating in silence. None of them met Caleb's eyes. "Sleep well?" Martha asked, though her tone suggested she knew the answer. "Well enough." Caleb ate his breakfast, trying to convince himself that Doc Thornton's words were just the whiskey talking, that this town's problems weren't his concern. He had his supplies. His horses were rested. The mountains were waiting. After breakfast, he walked to the general store, intending to pick up one last item he'd forgotten: tobacco for the long nights ahead. The store was empty, except for the nervous storekeeper, who seemed relieved to see a customer with straightforward business. As Caleb was paying, voices rose outside. A man's voice, loud and aggressive, slurred even this early in the morning. "Get back inside, woman. Nobody wants to see your ugly face." Through the store window, Caleb saw them. A young woman, heavily pregnant, standing on the porch of the cabin at the edge of town. Even from this distance, he could see the bruises on her face, the way she held herself, small, trying to disappear. She wore a faded dress that had been mended many times, and in her hands she clutched something small and colorful. The man who followed her out was thick-bodied, maybe 35, with the red face and unsteady gait of someone who started drinking before breakfast and never really stopped. His clothes were dirty, his beard unkempt, and his eyes held a mean glint that Caleb recognized from his years in the war, the look of a man who enjoyed causing pain. "Jacob Miller," the storekeeper whispered, confirming what Caleb had already guessed. Sarah, for this must be Sarah, bent to pick up what she'd dropped. It was a small blanket, hand-stitched, made from scraps of fabric in cheerful blues and yellows. A baby blanket, Caleb realized. Something she'd been making in secret, preparing for the child she carried. Jacob saw it too, his face twisted with rage. "What's this?" He snatched it from her hands. Wasting time on foolishness when you got work to do? Please. Sarah's voice was barely audible. It's for the baby. Jacob threw the blanket into the dirt and stomped on it with his boot. Baby don't need nothing but food and a roof. Same as you. You think we got money for pretty things? Sarah knelt, trying to retrieve the blanket, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. Jacob grabbed her arm, yanked her upright so roughly that she cried out. Several people on the street saw it happen. They all found something else to look at. Caleb felt his hands clench into fists. The storekeeper touched his arm. "Don't," he whispered urgently. "Just don't. It'll only make things worse for her." Jacob dragged Sarah back toward the cabin. She looked back once at the blanket lying in the dirt, and Caleb saw tears on her face. Then the cabin door slammed shut, and the street returned to its careful normalcy. Caleb stood there for a long moment. "How long has this been going on?" The storekeeper swallowed hard. 2 years, maybe more. She was from a homestead north of here. Parents died in a fire. Jacob married her a month later, said he was doing her a kindness. Guess we know what his kindness looks like. And nobody does anything? What can we do? The storekeeper's voice cracked. Jacob's got friends. Bull Mackey, Tom Reed, Pete Dawson. Mean men, all of them. They'd burn down anyone who interfered. The sheriff, he's in Jacob's pocket. Gets free whiskey at the saloon Jacob owns on the north side. The law ain't gonna help her. Caleb picked up his tobacco, paid, and walked out. The morning sun was bright, the sky cloudless and blue. A beautiful day. He walked to where the blanket lay in the dirt, bent down, and picked it up. The stitching was careful, loving. Each piece of fabric had been chosen with care, sewn together with hope. It was dirty now, one corner torn where Jacob's boot had caught it. He brushed it off as best he could and folded it carefully. Then he walked to the livery stable where Samuel was working. "I need to keep the horses another day," Caleb said. Samuel studied his face. "You heard something last night?" "Saw something this morning?" "Both." The older man nodded slowly. "I was a slave once, Mr. Stone, down in Mississippi. I know what it's like when people stand by and watch suffering, because it's easier than getting involved. When I got free, I promised myself I'd never be that person who looks away. But I got a grandson to protect. Jacob and his boys, they'd hurt Timothy just to hurt me." "I understand," Caleb said, and he did. Veer was a powerful thing, especially when it came to protecting family. He spent the rest of the morning walking the town, learning its layout. He noted where Jacob's friends lived, where the sheriff kept his office, such as it was, the various escape routes, old habits from his scouting days, reading terrain and calculating possibilities. Around noon, he returned to Martha's saloon. She was wiping down the bar, preparing for the evening crowd. "Thought you'd be gone by now," she said, not looking up. "Changed my mind." "That's a mistake." "Probably." Caleb set the baby blanket on the bar. "This needs to get back to Sarah Miller. Can you see that it does?" Martha stared at the blanket, then at him. Her eyes softened for just a moment before the hardness returned. "You don't know what you're doing. Jacob will kill you if you interfere. He can try. He won't come alone. Bull Mackey was a bare-knuckle fighter in Denver. Tom Reed's killed 3 men in card games. Pete Dawson's just mean, but he's mean with a shotgun. You'd be 1 man against 4. I've faced worse odds." Martha shook her head, but she took the blanket. "You're a fool. A noble fool, maybe, but still a fool." That afternoon, while Caleb sat on the porch of Martha's saloon cleaning his rifle, Doc Thornton walked by and paused. "You're still here? Seems that way. Changed your mind about leaving?" "Changed my mind about a lot of things." Caleb looked up at the doctor. "How's Sarah Miller's health?" "The baby?" Doc's face went grim. "As good as can be expected, given her circumstances. She's due in about a month, maybe less. But if Jacob keeps—" He stopped, couldn't finish the sentence. What would she need? If someone were to help her? Safety first. Then rest, proper food, and medical attention. The baby's positioned wrong. Breech, I think. It'll be a difficult birth even under the best circumstances. Under current circumstances... Again, he couldn't finish. Caleb nodded. "If things change, could you help her? Would you?" Doc Thornton met his eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding. "If things change, yes. I may be a coward, Mr. Stone, but I'm still a doctor. If someone gives me the chance to do the right thing, I'll take it. Good to know. As evening approached, Caleb returned to his room and sat by the window watching. He didn't have to wait long. Just after sunset, the sounds began again. This time they were worse. The crash of furniture breaking, Jacob's voice raised in incoherent rage, and Sarah's screams, terrified, desperate, begging him to stop, begging him to think of the baby. Caleb stood and looked out the window. People were closing their shutters, turning up their lamps to drown out the sounds. The town was performing its nightly ritual of pretending not to hear. Then came a sound that made his blood run cold. Sarah screamed, "The baby! You're hurting the baby!" More crashing, glass breaking, and Sarah's voice, higher now, panicked. "Please, God, no! The baby's not moving. Jacob, please." Caleb didn't remember making the decision. One moment he was at the window, the next he was moving. He strapped on his knife, grabbed his rifle, and headed for the stairs. Martha was at the bottom, her face pale. "Don't do this, please." "Can't stand by," Caleb said simply. "Not anymore. They'll kill you. Maybe, but I'll die knowing I tried." He walked past her out into the street. The sounds from the cabin were clearer now. Jacob's rage seemed boundless, fueled by whatever demons whiskey brought out in him. Sarah's cries had taken on a quality of pure terror, not for herself, Caleb realized, but for her child. He crossed the street, each step feeling weighted with consequence. Behind him, he heard doors opening slightly, people watching from darkened windows. The whole town was holding its breath. At the cabin door, Caleb paused for just a moment. Somewhere in his mind, Margaret's voice spoke to him, as it sometimes did in moments of importance. She'd always been the brave one, the one who'd stand up to injustice while he calculated the odds. "Sometimes, Caleb," she'd told him once, "the right thing is also the hard thing. That doesn't make it any less right." Inside, Sarah screamed again. The sound of a hand striking flesh was unmistakable. Caleb tried the door, locked. He stepped back and kicked it open with one powerful strike. The door crashed inward, slamming against the wall. The scene inside was worse than he'd imagined. The small cabin was a wreck, furniture overturned, dishes smashed, a chair broken into pieces. Sarah was in the corner, her arms wrapped protectively around her belly, blood running from her nose and a cut above her eye. Her dress was torn, and she was sobbing, trying to curl into herself despite her pregnant belly. Jacob Miller stood over her, his fist raised for another blow. He spun at the sound of the door breaking open, his face twisted with rage and drink. "Who the hell—" "Step away from her," Caleb said quietly. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, the tone of a man who had made peace with whatever came next. Jacob's eyes focused on him with difficulty. "This is my house. My wife, get out!" "Step away from her," Caleb repeated, not raising his voice. "I'll kill you." Jacob lunged at Caleb, fists swinging wildly. Caleb had faced drunken men before. They were dangerous because they felt no pain, but they were also slow and predictable. He sidestepped Jacob's rush, grabbed his arm, and used the man's momentum to send him crashing into the wall. Jacob roared, grabbed a broken chair leg, and swung it at Caleb's head. Caleb blocked it with his forearm, felt the impact, but ignored the pain. He drove his fist into Jacob's midsection once, twice, 3 times. The air went out of Jacob in a whoosh, and he dropped the chair leg. "Stay down," Caleb warned. Jacob didn't listen. He reached for a bottle on the floor, swung it at Caleb's head. Caleb caught his wrist, twisted, and the bottle fell. Then he delivered a single, precise punch to Jacob's jaw. The man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed to the floor, unconscious. The cabin fell silent except for Sarah's ragged breathing. Caleb turned to her slowly, carefully, keeping his hands visible. She was looking at him with wide, terrified eyes, trembling. "Sarah," he said gently, "my name is Caleb Stone. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help." She didn't move, just stared at him like a trapped animal. "I need to get you to the doctor. You're bleeding, and we need to make sure the baby's all right." He took a slow step toward her, keeping his voice calm and even. "Will you let me help you?" Sarah looked down at her belly, touched it gently. Tears streamed down her face. "I can't feel the baby moving," she whispered. "He hit me in the stomach." "I can't feel. Then we need to go now." Caleb knelt down, making himself less threatening. "Will you trust me? Just for tonight?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment, searching his face. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she nodded slowly. "Please, please help my baby." Caleb helped her to her feet as gently as he could. She was shaking badly, going into shock. He removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Can you walk?" "I think so." They made it to the door. Outside, the street was no longer empty. A crowd had gathered at a safe distance, watching. Martha stood at the front, her face unreadable. Doc Thornton was already hurrying toward them, medical bag in hand, but so were others. 3 men stood near the saloon, and even in the darkness, Caleb recognized the threat in their postures. "Jacob's friends had arrived. That's Bull Mackey, Tom Reed, and Pete Dawson," Martha said quietly as she reached them. "They're not going to let this go." "Let them try," Caleb said. He looked at the gathered crowd. "This woman needs a doctor. Anyone have a problem with that?" No one spoke. The 3 men glared but didn't move. Not yet. Doc Thornton reached them, took one look at Sarah's face, and his expression hardened. "Get her to my office, now." Together, Caleb and the doctor helped Sarah down the street. Every step felt like a mile, waiting for violence to erupt. But they made it to Doc's office, a small building attached to his home, and got Sarah inside. As Doc began examining her, checking her injuries and listening for the baby's heartbeat, Caleb stood guard at the door. Through the window, he could see Jacob's friends talking, planning. The town watched, waiting to see what would happen next. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. Inside Doc Thornton's office, the lamplight cast long shadows across walls lined with medical books and glass jars filled with instruments. Sarah lay on the examination table, still trembling, her hands protectively cradled around her belly. Doc worked with quiet efficiency, cleaning her wounds, checking her eyes for signs of concussion. Listening intently with his stethoscope, Caleb stood by the door, his father's Bowie knife now visible on his hip. The knife had belonged to his grandfather before his father, passed down through 3 generations. Its blade was 12 inches of folded steel, the handle worn smooth by decades of use. His father had carried it through the Mexican War, had taught young Caleb how to maintain it, sharpen it, respect it. "A knife like this," his father had said, "isn't just a tool. It's a responsibility. You draw it, you'd better have good reason." Tonight felt like good reason. Through the window, Caleb could see Jacob's 3 friends still gathered in the street. Bull Mackey was the largest, a thick-necked brute with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had stopped too many fists. Tom Reed was thinner, dressed better, with the calculating eyes of a man who saw every interaction as a potential advantage. Pete Dawson kept touching the shotgun he carried, nervous energy making him pace. "How is she?" Caleb asked without turning from the window. Doc Thornton was quiet for a moment longer, then straightened up. 3 cracked ribs, I think. Definitely a concussion. That cut above her eye will need stitches. The nose isn't broken, thankfully." He paused. "The baby," Sarah made a small sound of distress. "The baby has a strong heartbeat," Doc continued quickly. "I can feel movement. I think the shock and pain made it go still for a while, but it's moving now. The positioning is still breech, which worries me for the delivery, but as far as I can tell, the child wasn't seriously harmed." Sarah's sob of relief filled the room. "Thank God, oh, thank God. But you need rest," Doc said firmly. "Complete rest. No stress, good food, and absolutely no more violence. Another beating like this could kill both of you." "She can't go back there," Caleb said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Doc agreed. "She absolutely cannot. Then where does she go?" Sarah's voice was small, frightened. "I have nowhere. No family, no money. Jacob," she stopped, fear crossing her face. "He'll come for me. He always said if I tried to leave, he'd hunt me down." "He meant it. Let him try," Caleb said quietly. Doc finished stitching the cut above Sarah's eye, then helped her sit up slowly. "Martha has a spare room above the saloon. It's not much, but it's clean and safe. Martha's tougher than she looks, and she's got a shotgun she knows how to use. Will she take me in?" Sarah asked. "I can't pay." "Martha will do the right thing," Doc said with certainty. "Let me talk to her." As if summoned, Martha appeared at the door, letting herself in without knocking. She took one look at Sarah's bandaged face and set her jaw. "I've got the room ready. Clean sheets, water basin, and I made some broth. Girl looks like she hasn't eaten properly in months." "I couldn't," Sarah began. "I don't want to bring trouble." "Trouble's already here," Martha interrupted. "Has been for 2 years, while we all pretended not to see it. Maybe it's time we stop pretending." She looked at Caleb. "Jacob's friends are working themselves up to something. Bull's talking loud about property rights and a man's sovereignty over his wife. Tom's more practical. He's worried about precedent, about what happens if folks start interfering in each other's business. Pete's just waiting to see which way the wind blows." "And Jacob?" Caleb asked. "Still unconscious in his cabin, last I heard. But he won't stay that way forever." Doc helped Sarah to her feet. She swayed, and Caleb moved to steady her, but she flinched at his approach. He stopped immediately, keeping his distance. She noticed, seemed to understand that he was giving her space, and some of the fear in her eyes eased. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's just, men have only ever hurt me." "No apology needed," Caleb said gently. "You take the time you need to feel safe." They made their way to Martha's saloon, a small procession that felt like a statement. Several townspeople watched from windows. Caleb noticed some faces showing approval, others fear, still others calculation. The town was deciding which side to be on, or whether to have a side at all. Martha's spare room was on the second floor, away from the noise of the saloon below. It was small but comfortable, with a bed, a chair, and a window that overlooked the side street rather than the main thoroughfare. Martha had indeed prepared broth along with bread and cheese. "You eat," Martha instructed Sarah, "then you sleep. Doc will check on you tomorrow. And if anyone tries to get up these stairs who shouldn't, they'll find I'm not as hospitable as I appear." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Martha's face softened. "I had a daughter once. She married young, against my advice. Her husband had a mean streak hidden behind a charming smile. By the time we realized what he was, it was too late. She died giving birth to his child. The baby died too. I spent years wishing I'd done something, said something, acted somehow." She touched Sarah's hand gently. "I won't make that mistake twice." After Martha left, Doc checked Sarah once more, left her some laudanum for the pain, and followed Caleb back downstairs. The saloon was fuller now. The evening crowd arrived. Every conversation stopped when they appeared. Doc walked to the bar, and Caleb followed. "Whiskey," Doc told Martha. "2 glasses." They drank in silence for a moment. Then a voice called out from across the room. "That woman's Jacob Miller's wife. You got no right keeping her here." Caleb turned to see Bull Mackey standing near the door, Tom Reed and Pete Dawson flanking him. The 3 men had entered while he'd been upstairs. "She's a free woman who chose to leave," Martha said firmly. "Last I checked, this is still America, where people have that right." "Marriage is a contract," Tom Reed said smoothly. "Binding legal contract. She belongs to Jacob." "People don't belong to people," Doc said quietly. "We fought a war about that." Bull Mackey's face reddened. "You calling us slavers?" "I'm saying a woman has the right to be safe in her own home," Doc replied. "And if her home isn't safe, she has the right to leave. Jacob's gonna want his wife back," Pete Dawson said, his hand resting on his shotgun. "We're here to make sure that happens." Caleb set his whiskey glass down carefully and turned to face the 3 men. His hand didn't move toward his knife, but everyone in the room was suddenly aware of its presence on his hip. "Sarah stays here," Caleb said simply. "She's under protection now, your protection." Bull Mackey laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're one man, stranger. One old mountain man who should have kept riding this morning." "Maybe," Caleb allowed. "But I'm the man standing between you and that woman. So you have a choice. You can leave peacefully, or we can see how this plays out. Your call." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Other patrons had backed away, giving the confrontation space. Martha's hand disappeared below the bar, doubtless reaching for that shotgun she'd mentioned. Tom Reed studied Caleb with calculating eyes. "You're making enemies, friend. Powerful enemies. Over a woman you don't even know." "I know enough," Caleb said. "I know she's 8 months pregnant. I know she's been beaten regularly. I know her husband is a coward who hits women. That's all I need to know." Noble sentiments, Tom said. But nobility doesn't stop bullets. Neither does talk, Caleb replied evenly. So either make your move or get out. For a long moment the three men stood there, weighing their options. Bull wanted to fight. That was clear in his clenched fists and red face. Pete was scared, his hand trembling on his shotgun. Tom was thinking, calculating odds and consequences. Finally, Tom Reed spoke. This isn't over. Jacob's our friend. We look after our own. So do I, Caleb said. The three men left, but their departure felt more like a retreat before a larger battle. As soon as they were gone, the saloon erupted in conversation. Doc finished his whiskey in one gulp. You've done it now. Jacob's not just going to let this go. When he wakes up and finds his wife gone, finds you're the one who took her, he'll come after you with everything he has. Let him come. You don't understand, Doc said urgently. Jacob's not just a drunk and a bully. He's connected. He runs illegal whiskey from a still up north. Half the county's sheriffs look the other way because he pays them off. He's got 20 men he can call on if he needs them. You're one man with a knife. I've got more than a knife, Caleb said quietly. He touched the Bowie knife's handle, feeling its familiar weight. I've got the knowledge that I'm doing what's right. That counts for something. Does it count for enough? Doc asked. Against 20 men? Caleb thought of Margaret and Emma, of the helplessness he'd felt watching fever take them while he could do nothing. He thought of 15 years in the mountains, running from the world because living in it hurt too much. He thought of Sarah's terrified face, her hands protecting her unborn child. It'll have to, he said simply. A young boy appeared at the saloon door. Timothy, Samuel's grandson from the livery. His eyes were wide, frightened. Mr. Stone, my grandpa sent me. Says Jacob Miller's awake and gathering men. Says you should know they're coming. The saloon went quiet. Martha came out from behind the bar. We can barricade the doors. Won't help, Tom Reed had said. Jacob could call on 20 men, and if even half showed up, they'd overwhelm any defense the saloon could mount. Caleb looked at the faces around him. Doc Thornton, Martha Jenkins, young Timothy and others. Regular people who'd spent 2 years pretending not to see Sarah's suffering. He could see them wrestling with their consciences now, deciding whether redemption was worth the risk. Anyone who wants to leave, leave now, Caleb said clearly. This isn't your fight. I'm the one who broke into Jacob's cabin. I'm the one he'll want to kill. No shame in walking away. No one moved. Doc Thornton cleared his throat. I'm tired of being a coward. I'm staying, Martha nodded. This is my saloon. I don't run from fights in my own establishment. A farmer Caleb had seen earlier stood up. Name's Henry Porter. Got a wife and 3 kids. Been watching Sarah Miller suffer for 2 years and telling myself it wasn't my business. His face was grim. I'm done telling myself that. I'll stand with you. 2 more men stood, brothers named Jack and William Hayes, who ran a small ranch outside town. We're in, Jack said simply. Caleb felt something shift in his chest. For 15 years he'd been alone because he chose to be. Now facing the hardest fight of his life, he found he wasn't alone at all. All right then, he said. We need to prepare. Jacob's coming for Sarah, but he's not getting her. Everyone agreed. They were. Then let's get to work. Dawn arrived with the kind of clarity that made everything feel sharper, more real. Caleb had spent the night taking shifts with Henry and the Hayes brothers, watching the street for any sign of Jacob's approach. But the attack hadn't come. Not yet. Sarah had slept fitfully, the laudanum helping but unable to completely ease her pain. When Martha brought her breakfast, she found Sarah sitting by the window, holding something small and golden in her palm. What's that? Martha asked gently. Sarah opened her hand to reveal a simple gold wedding ring. I've been thinking about it all night, she said quietly. What it means, what it's supposed to mean versus what it actually meant. The ring had been her mother's, passed down when Sarah married Jacob. She'd believed then that marriage meant safety, partnership, building a life together. Instead, it had meant fear, pain, and isolation. Jacob gave me this on our wedding day, Sarah continued, her voice distant. Told me I was his now, that he'd take care of me. I was so grateful. I had nothing, no family, no home, no prospects. He seemed like a gift from God. She laughed bitterly. Some gift. Martha sat down beside her. You couldn't have known, couldn't I? Sarah touched her bruised face. There were signs. Small things at first. The way he'd grip my arm too hard. How he'd get angry over nothing. But I told myself I was imagining it, that I should be grateful someone wanted me at all. She stood up slowly, wincing at the pain in her ribs, and walked to the wash basin. For a long moment she stared at the ring. Then deliberately she removed it from her finger and set it on the table. I'm not his anymore, she said firmly. I'm my own. And this baby, she touched her belly tenderly, this baby is going to grow up knowing that freedom is worth fighting for. That you don't have to accept cruelty just because it comes wrapped in the word family. Martha picked up the ring, examined it. This is real gold. You could sell it, get money for when the baby comes. I don't want anything from him, Sarah said. Not his name, not his ring, not his claim on me or my child. Let it rust for all I care. Martha pocketed the ring anyway. We'll talk about it later. For now, you need to eat. Downstairs, Caleb was conferring with Doc Thornton and the others who'd stayed through the night. They'd barricaded the back door, positioned themselves to watch all approaches, and inventoried their weapons. It wasn't much. A few rifles, Martha's shotgun, Caleb's bowie knife, and whatever improvised weapons they could gather. Jacob's taking his time, Henry Porter said nervously. That worries me more than if he'd come right away. He's gathering support, Doc said, making sure he has enough men that we can't possibly win. He wants to make an example. The morning wore on. Townspeople went about their business, but there was a tension in the air, a sense that something inevitable was building. Samuel arrived with Timothy, both carrying parcels of food Martha had arranged to purchase from them. People are talking, Samuel said quietly to Caleb. Half the town thinks you're a hero. The other half thinks you're a fool who's going to get people killed. What do you think? Caleb asked. Samuel considered. I think you're both. I also think you're necessary. Sometimes it takes a fool to do the heroic thing. Around midday, Sheriff Wade finally appeared. He was a soft man gone to fat, with a badge that looked more like decoration than authority. He walked into the saloon with the air of someone performing an unpleasant duty. I'm here about Sarah Miller, he announced. What about her? Martha demanded. Her husband's filed a complaint. Says she was kidnapped from his home. Says this man, he gestured at Caleb, broke into his house and assaulted him. That man, Doc Thornton said sharply, stopped Jacob Miller from beating his pregnant wife to death. I have medical evidence of her injuries. 3 cracked ribs, concussion, multiple contusions. She's 8 months pregnant, Sheriff. 8 months, and he was hitting her in the stomach. Wade shifted uncomfortably. Domestic disputes aren't really law matters. What happens between a man and his wife is attempted murder when he's trying to kill her and their unborn child. Caleb interrupted. I don't care what you call it, Sheriff. I'm not letting her go back to that. You're interfering with a marriage contract, Wade said, but his voice lacked conviction. Jacob has legal rights. So does Sarah, Martha said fiercely. The right to live? The right to protect her child? Or do those not count? Wade looked around the room at the assembled faces, all of them hostile, all of them ready to defend Sarah. He seemed to deflate. Look, I'm just trying to keep the peace. Jacob's got a lot of friends. If this escalates, then let it escalate, Henry Porter said. We're not backing down. Wade left without another word, and they all knew what it meant. The law, such as it was, had chosen its side. They were on their own. That afternoon, a delegation arrived. Not Jacob, but Bull Mackey and Tom Reed, along with 3 other men Caleb didn't recognize. They stood in the street outside the saloon, making no move to enter, but making their presence known. Caleb went out to meet them, his hand resting casually near his knife. We're here with a proposal, Tom Reed said. He'd positioned himself as the spokesman, the reasonable voice. Jacob's willing to let bygones be bygones if Sarah comes back. No harm to you or anyone who helped her. We all just forget this happened. And Sarah? Caleb asked. What happens to her? She's Jacob's wife. She goes back where she belongs. To be beaten again? To risk her life and her baby's life. Tom shrugged. That's between husband and wife. Not our business. Not yours either. I'm making it my business. Bull Mackey stepped forward. You got no right. She's his property. She's a human being, Caleb interrupted. Not property. And she's made her choice. She's not going back. Then you're choosing war, one of the other men said. He was young, maybe 25, with the eager eyes of someone who'd never really been tested. Jacob's got 15 men ready to ride. You got what, 5, 6? You can't win this. Maybe not, Caleb said calmly. But we'll make you pay for every inch. And when it's over, when the dust settles and the marshal from Fort Collins finally arrives to investigate why there's bodies in the street, you'll all hang. Because what you're defending isn't a man's rights, it's attempted murder. And the law eventually catches up. Tom Reed's face tightened. He was smart enough to see the logic, to understand that even if they won the immediate fight, they might lose the larger war. You're bluffing. No marshal's coming. Doc Thornton sent a telegram 2 days ago, Caleb lied smoothly. Marshal Hayes is already on his way. Should be here in 3, maybe 4 days. You really want to start a war you can't finish before the law arrives? He watched doubt flicker across their faces. It was a good bluff, made better by the calm certainty in his voice. In truth, no telegram had been sent. The nearest telegraph office was in a town 20 miles away. But they didn't know that. Jacob won't wait, Bull Mackey said, but his voice had lost some of its aggression. Then Jacob's a fool, Caleb replied. But you're not, Tom. I can see it in your eyes. You're calculating odds, thinking about consequences. So here's what I'm offering. Walk away. Tell Jacob that Sarah's gone, that she's under protection, and that if he's smart, he'll cut his losses and move on. There's no winning this for him, only different degrees of losing. Tom Reed stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away, the others following. Bull Mackey looked like he wanted to argue, but Tom's departure made the decision for him. Inside the saloon, Doc Thornton let out a breath he'd been holding. That was well played. But they'll be back. I know, Caleb said. But we bought time. Time for people to think, to let fear cool into reason. Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, moving carefully. She'd heard everything. You lied for me. About the marshal. I did. Why? You could have let me go back. Ended this cleanly. Caleb looked at her. This young woman with bruises on her face and a child growing inside her, who'd had every reason to give up hope, but somehow hadn't. Because giving up on you would be giving up on the idea that people matter more than peace. And I've spent too many years giving up on things that matter. That evening, as the sun set, a remarkable thing happened. People started arriving at the saloon, not to drink or socialize, but to help. A widow named Mrs. Chen brought blankets and food. The blacksmith, a Swedish man named Lars, arrived with tools to reinforce the doors. 3 more farmers came, saying they'd stand watch through the night. We've been ashamed too long, one of them said simply. Time we did right. Sarah sat in her room, overwhelmed by the support from people who'd been strangers yesterday. Martha sat with her, holding her hand. Why now? Sarah asked. Why didn't anyone help before? Because we were waiting for someone else to be brave first, Martha admitted. That's the truth of it. We all knew what was happening. We all felt guilty. But fear's a powerful thing, and it's easier to live with guilt than risk yourself. Then Caleb came along and showed us it was possible to stand up. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person willing to go first. Sarah touched her belly, felt the baby moving strongly now. I want my child to grow up in a world where people don't wait, where they act when they see wrong. Then we'd better make sure your child has that chance, Martha said. Caleb spent the evening preparing. His military training from years ago came back like muscle memory, checking sight lines, planning escape routes, positioning defenders where they'd be most effective. Henry Porter watched him work with growing respect. You've done this before, Henry observed. More than just mountain living. I was a scout in the Indian Wars, Caleb admitted. Long time ago. Different life. Why'd you leave it? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Lost too many good men to bad orders? Started to wonder what we were really fighting for. Then I went home and found something worth fighting for. My wife and daughter. When they died, I lost my reason to fight at all. And now... Caleb looked toward the stairs, where Sarah's room was. Now I remember what it feels like to protect something that matters. As night fell, Caleb took out his journal and wrote by lamplight. He wrote about Sarah, about the town finding its conscience, about the strange way life sometimes gives you second chances when you least expect them. He wrote about Margaret and Emma, telling them about this pregnant woman who reminded him why he'd fallen in love with Margaret in the first place, her fierce protection of the vulnerable, her refusal to look away from injustice. Around midnight, Timothy came running with news from his grandfather. "Mr. Stone, Jacob's at the saloon on the north side. He's drunk and making threats. Says he's come in at dawn with everyone he can gather. Says he's going to burn this place down if he has to." The moment of truth was coming. Caleb looked at the people who'd chosen to stand with him, ordinary folks who'd found extraordinary courage. He thought about the odds, about the very real possibility that come dawn, some of them might die. "Anyone who wants to leave can leave," he said again. "No judgment, no shame." No one moved. "Then we prepare," Caleb said. "And we make damn sure that when Jacob comes, he finds we're not as easy to break as he thinks." Doc Thornton raised his glass. "To standing up when it matters." They all drank to that. To courage found late, but found nonetheless. To the idea that it's never too late to do the right thing. And to the hope that sometimes, against all odds, the good guys win. Sarah watched from her window as the defenders prepared. She held the baby blanket that Martha had cleaned and returned to her, her fingers tracing the careful stitches she'd made with love and hope. Tomorrow would bring violence. Tomorrow might bring death. But tomorrow would also bring the dawn, and with it, the chance for a new beginning. She touched her belly and whispered to the child within, "Your mother's not alone anymore, little one. We've got people fighting for us. Real people, brave people. And whatever happens tomorrow, you should know. You're already loved by more than just me. You're loved by a whole town that finally found its soul." Outside, Caleb Stone stood watch under the stars, his father's knife at his side, and prepared for the battle to come. Dawn came with fire, not the metaphorical kind, but real flames licking at the back of Martha's saloon. Smoke beginning to curl through the gaps in the boards. Caleb smelled it first, his mountain-trained senses alerting him before the smoke became visible. He woke the others with urgent whispers, and chaos erupted in controlled fashion. "Water!" Martha shouted, already moving. "Before it spreads." While half the defenders rushed to fight the fire with buckets from the well, Caleb understood immediately what was happening. This was a diversion, a tactical move to split their forces and create confusion. Jacob might be a drunk and a coward, but someone advising him new strategy. "Henry, take 3 men and keep watch on the front," Caleb ordered. "This is a feint." He was right. As townspeople rushed to help fight the flames, Bull Mackey crashed through an upstairs window at the side of the building, the one that led to the hallway near Sarah's room. He'd climbed up while everyone was distracted, using a ladder that had been positioned earlier in the darkness. Sarah heard the glass breaking and screamed. She grabbed the small knife Caleb had given her, barely more than a letter opener, and held it with shaking hands. Her heart pounded as Mackey's huge form squeezed through the window, blocking her escape route to the stairs. "Time to go home, Mrs. Miller," Mackey said, advancing on her. "Jacob's waiting." "I'll die first," Sarah said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. She thought of her baby, of Martha's kindness, of Caleb risking everything for someone he didn't even know. She thought of 2 years of accepting blows because she believed she had no choice. Not anymore. When Mackey lunged for her, she didn't freeze. She drove the small knife forward, catching him in the forearm. It wasn't deep, the blade was too small, but it was enough to make him roar with pain and surprise. "You little—" He swung his meaty fist. But Sarah ducked, her pregnant belly making her clumsy, but determination making her quick. She screamed again, louder this time. Caleb heard her. He abandoned the fire and raced upstairs, taking the steps 3 at a time. He reached the hallway just as Mackey grabbed Sarah by the hair and dragged her toward the broken window. "Let her go!" Caleb's voice cut through the chaos. Mackey turned, Sarah still in his grip, and grinned. "Come make me, old man." The hallway was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide, with Sarah's room at one end and the stairs at the other. Not much room to maneuver. Mackie positioned Sarah between himself and Caleb, using her as a shield. Caleb's mind raced through options. A direct assault would risk Sarah and the baby. But Mackie was trying to get her to that window, where accomplices were presumably waiting below. Every second mattered. "Bull," Caleb said calmly, "you're making a mistake. That fire's under control. My people are watching the front. However many men Jacob brought, they're not going to get through. You're alone up here and you're trapped." "I got the woman," Mackie countered. "That makes you trapped. You've got a pregnant woman who's already stabbed you once. Look at your arm." Mackie glanced down at the blood seeping through his sleeve. Sarah had cut deeper than he'd realized. "Good, let her go and you can walk away," Caleb continued. "I give you my word. But if you hurt her or that baby, there's nowhere in this territory you can hide that I won't find you." Something in Caleb's voice, the absolute certainty, the promise of violence delivered calmly, made Mackie hesitate. In that moment of doubt, Sarah acted. She stomped down hard on his instep with her heel and twisted violently away from his grip. Mackie howled, released her reflexively, and Sarah dove to the side into her room. Caleb charged forward, closing the distance before Mackie could recover. They collided in the narrow hallway like two bulls. Mackie's bulk against Caleb's wiry strength and experience. Mackie threw a punch that would have crushed Caleb's skull if it had connected. But Caleb slipped it, drove his knee into Mackie's midsection. The bigger man grunted but didn't go down. He grabbed Caleb in a bear hug, trying to use his size advantage to crush the breath from him. Caleb drove his forehead into Mackie's nose. Once, twice. Blood spurted. Mackie's grip loosened, and Caleb broke free, delivered a series of precise strikes to vulnerable points: throat, solar plexus, kidneys. Each blow calculated, no energy wasted. Mackie staggered, crashed into the wall. Caleb grabbed his collar and drove him backward, slamming him into the doorframe. The big man's eyes went unfocused, and he slid down to sit heavily on the floor. Semi-conscious, Caleb stood over him, breathing hard, his father's Bowie knife now in his hand, though he didn't remember drawing it. For a moment he could end this threat permanently. One thrust and Bull Mackie would never hurt anyone again, but Sarah was watching from her doorway, her hand on her belly, and Caleb remembered who he wanted to be. Not a killer unless absolutely necessary. A protector, yes, but not an executioner. He lowered the knife. "Get him tied up," he told Henry, who'd appeared at the top of the stairs. And someone bored up that window. Below, the fire was out, leaving only the acrid smell of smoke. The attack had failed, but it had been closer than Caleb liked. They'd gotten lucky. Bull's arrogance had made him come alone, and Sarah's courage had bought crucial seconds. As the morning sun rose higher, Doc Thornton brought unexpected news. He'd been searching through old medical records, looking for something, and found it in a box of papers from a previous doctor who'd practiced in Cedar Flats years ago. "Look at this," Doc said, spreading a faded wanted poster on Martha's bar. The face on it was younger, cleaner, but unmistakable. "That's Jacob," Martha said. "That's Jacob Marston," Doc corrected. "Not Miller. He changed his name. He's wanted in Kansas for murder. Killed a man in a bar fight in Dodge City 3 years ago. Beat him to death over a poker game." The room went silent as everyone absorbed this information. "So he's not just an abuser," Henry said slowly. "He's a killer, a wanted killer," Doc emphasized. "There's a warrant. This changes everything. We're not just protecting Sarah from a bad husband. We're harboring a witness against a murderer." Caleb studied the poster. The reward was $200, enough to interest any bounty hunter. More importantly, it meant federal law had a stake in this. The marshal's office would care about a wanted murderer, even if they didn't care much about domestic violence. "Can we send for a real lawman now?" one of the farmers asked. "Show them this." "The nearest federal marshal is in Fort Collins," Doc said. 4 days' ride, maybe 5. "We'd need to send someone who could get through Jacob's men watching the roads." "I'll go," young Timothy volunteered. His voice cracked on the words, but his determination was clear. "I'm small fast. I can slip past them on the back trails my grandpa showed me. Samuel appeared in the doorway, having heard his grandson's offer. No, too dangerous. Grandpa, you taught me those trails so I could help when it mattered, Timothy argued. This matters. That lady up there needs help. Her baby needs help. I can do this. The debate was heated but brief. Time was critical. Every hour they delayed was another hour Jacob had to gather forces or flee. Finally, with great reluctance, Samuel agreed. Doc wrote out a detailed message explaining the situation, included the wanted poster, and sealed it with wax. Give this directly to Marshal Hayes. No one else. You understand? Timothy nodded solemnly, tucked the package inside his shirt. I'll ride fast and careful, promise. Caleb walked with the boy to the livery stable. As Timothy prepared his fastest horse, Caleb pressed a silver dollar into his hand. That's for you, for being brave. Your grandfather's proud, even if he's too scared to say it, Mr. Stone. Why are you doing all this? For a woman you don't even know? Caleb was quiet for a moment, watching the boy check his saddle. I had a daughter once. She'd be about Sarah's age now, if she'd lived. Sometimes I think about what kind of world I'd want her to grow up in. A world where people help each other, where men like Jacob don't get away with cruelty just because everyone's too scared to stop them. He met Timothy's eyes. You riding to Fort Collins? That's the kind of courage that makes the world better. Don't ever forget that. Timothy rode out just after sunrise, taking the eastern trail that wound through rough country few people traveled. Within an hour he was out of sight, and all they could do was hope he'd make it through. Back at the saloon, Sarah was shaken but resolute. He tried to take me, she said to the gathered defenders. Bull Mackey tried to drag me back. If I'd been alone, if Caleb hadn't been here, she couldn't finish the sentence. But you weren't alone, Martha said firmly. And you fought. You drew blood. That took strength. I was terrified. Courage isn't not being scared, Caleb said. It's being scared and acting anyway. You did that. Your baby's going to hear that story someday. As they cleaned up from the fire and reinforced their defenses, word spread through town about the wanted poster. The revelation that Jacob Marston was a murderer on the run changed calculations. Some who'd been sympathetic to his cause, believing in a man's right to his wife, now saw him for what he truly was, a violent criminal. More people came forward to help. A rancher named McCready arrived with 3 of his hands, all armed. Heard about the wanted poster, he said to Caleb. Can't have murderers operating free in our territory. We're with you. By noon they had 15 defenders, well armed and positioned. The dynamic had shifted. Jacob was no longer just a local bully. He was a fugitive, and those supporting him were harboring a criminal. Inside his cabin, Jacob Miller, or Marston, drank and raged. Tom Reed and Pete Dawson tried to reason with him, but the appearance of that wanted poster had shattered his composure. All the violence in his nature, usually directed at Sarah, now sought other outlets. They've ruined me, Jacob snarled. That mountain man, that meddling doctor, all of them. I'll kill them. I'll kill them all. Jacob, you need to run, Tom urged. Get out of the territory. That poster changes everything. Run? After they stole my wife? Made me look weak? You're wanted for murder, Tom shouted. Pride isn't worth hanging for. But Jacob was beyond reason. The combination of alcohol, humiliation, and cornered animal desperation had pushed him past rational thought. He'd gathered 11 men, the dregs of the surrounding homesteads, criminals and malcontents who owed him favors or shared his mean nature. Tonight, Jacob decided. We hit them tonight. Kill anyone who resists. Burn the place if we have to. I want my wife back, and I want that mountain man dead. As the day wore on toward evening, both sides prepared for the confrontation everyone knew was coming. The town of Cedar Flats, which had spent years avoiding conflict, now found itself the stage for a battle that would determine not just Sarah's fate, but the soul of the community itself. Caleb cleaned his rifle, sharpened his father's bowie knife, and thought about the strange path that had led him here. 3 days ago, he'd been alone in the mountains, convinced his life held no more purpose than survival. Now he was preparing to defend a pregnant woman and possibly die doing it. Margaret would have approved, he thought. She'd always said the measure of a man wasn't what he did when it was easy, but what he chose when it was hard. He took out his journal and wrote what might be his final entry. He wrote about Sarah's courage, about Timothy's bravery, about ordinary people choosing to be extraordinary. He wrote about redemption and second chances, and the unexpected ways life can give meaning to what seemed like meaningless years. Then he closed the journal, checked his weapons one last time, and went downstairs to face whatever the night would bring. The attack came at midnight, just as Caleb had predicted. Not a direct frontal assault, but something more cunning and more desperate. Jacob and his men set fire to the back of the saloon again, but this time with real commitment, using lamp oil to ensure it would spread quickly. The flames caught fast, turning the rear wall into a sheet of orange heat, but Caleb had learned from the first attempt. He'd positioned men with water barrels and wet blankets at strategic points. As the fire roared to life, his defenders moved with practiced efficiency, containing it before it could spread to the main structure. That's when the real assault began. Jacob and his men charged the front door, 11 against 15 in darkness, with desperation making them bold. The street erupted in violence. Gunfire cracked the night air. Men shouted. Glass shattered. The peaceful frontier town became a battlefield, and families huddled in their homes, praying for it to end. Inside the saloon, Caleb had positioned his defenders carefully. Henry and the Hayes brothers held the ground floor, using tables as cover. Macready and his ranch hands defended the stairs. Doc Thornton, despite his age and profession, held a rifle with steady hands. The initial volley from Jacob's men was wild, driven by alcohol and anger rather than accuracy. Windows exploded inward, but most shots went high or wide. The defenders' return fire was more measured, more precise. One of Jacob's men went down screaming, shot through the thigh. Another stumbled back, clutching a shattered shoulder. The assault faltered as the attackers realized this wasn't going to be the easy victory Jacob had promised. Pull back, Tom Reed shouted, showing more sense than his employer. It's suicide! But Jacob wasn't listening. He fired wildly at the saloon, screaming Sarah's name like a curse. Pete Dawson tried to drag him to cover, but Jacob shook him off and charged at the door. He never made it. Henry Porter, the farmer who'd spent 2 years hating his own cowardice, stepped into the doorway and fired once. The shot took Jacob in the leg, spinning him around and dropping him into the dust. The fight went out of the attackers then. Seeing their leader down, bleeding and cursing, they broke and ran. Only Tom Reed stayed, dragging Jacob toward cover, while Pete Dawson fired wild shots to discourage pursuit. Within minutes, it was over. The fire at the back was extinguished. Jacob's men had scattered. 2 of the attackers lay wounded in the street, crying for help that would come from Doc Thornton's merciful hands, even though they'd just tried to kill him. But victory came with cost. One of Macready's ranch hands was dead, shot through the heart in the initial volley. Jack Hayes had taken a bullet in the arm, and Martha had glass cuts across her face from a shattered window. The saloon looked like a war zone, smoke-stained and bullet-riddled. Sarah had stayed in her room throughout, as instructed, but the sounds of battle had been terrible. When Caleb came to check on her, he found her sitting on the floor in the corner, arms wrapped around her belly, rocking slightly. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice small. "For tonight," Caleb said gently. He sat down across from her, wincing at his own injuries. Nothing serious, but he'd been grazed by a bullet across his ribs. "How's the baby?" Sarah touched her belly. "Moving, scared, I think. I can feel the heartbeat racing. Baby knows you're protecting it. That's what counts. A man died tonight," Sarah said, tears streaking her face. "Because of me. Because I wouldn't go back." "No," Caleb said firmly. "A man died because Jacob Marston chose violence. You chose freedom. There's a difference. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of cleanup below, broken glass being swept, wounded being tended, the dead being carried to Doc's office with reverence and sorrow. "Mr. Stone?" Sarah's voice was quiet. "Why are you really doing this?" "Please, the truth." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his silver pocket watch. It was dented, scratched, the glass cracked but still intact. He opened it, revealing a faded photograph inside the cover. A woman with kind eyes and a little girl with pigtails. "My wife, Margaret," he said softly. "And our daughter, Emma. She was 7 when this was taken, 8 when she died." Sarah looked at the photograph, then at Caleb's face, seeing the grief still there after 15 years. "Fever took them both in the same week," Caleb continued. "I was helpless. All I could do was watch them slip away, hold their hands and fail to save them. When it was over, I had nothing left. No reason to stay in the world of the living. So I went to the mountains and became a ghost." He closed the watch carefully, wound it out of habit, though it had stopped keeping proper time years ago. "But ghosts don't really live, Sarah. They just exist. For 15 years, that's all I did. Then I rode into this town and heard you scream, and something in me woke up. Maybe it was seeing someone I could actually help. Maybe it was being given a second chance to protect someone when I couldn't protect my own family. I don't know. But I know that for the first time since I buried Margaret and Emma, I feel like I have a purpose again." Sarah reached out and touched his hand. "They'd be proud of you. Your wife and daughter. What you're doing here, it's the kind of thing that makes their deaths mean something. Does that make sense?" It did, more than she knew. Caleb felt something in his chest loosen. A grief knot he'd carried so long it had become part of him. "Not gone, never gone, but somehow lighter. Get some rest," he said, standing. "Tomorrow brings new challenges." Downstairs, the defenders were exhausted but grimly satisfied. They'd held. They'd won. But they all knew this wasn't over. Doc Thornton was treating the wounded, both defenders and attackers. The Hippocratic Oath didn't distinguish between sides, and he worked on everyone with equal care. One of Jacob's men, the one shot in the thigh, grabbed Doc's wrist. "Why help me?" the man gasped. "We tried to kill you." "Because I'm a doctor," Doc said simply, "and because every life matters, even the ones being wasted on bad causes." Around 3 in the morning, a rider approached cautiously, hands raised to show he was unarmed. It was Tom Reed, looking haggard and defeated. "I'm here under flag of truce," he called out. Caleb came out to meet him, rifle in hand. "Say your piece." "Jacob's bad hurt. Needs a doctor. I'm asking, not demanding, if Doc Thornton would treat him. After he tried to burn us out? Kill us?" "Yeah," Tom said quietly. "After all that, because I'm starting to realize I've been on the wrong side of this. Jacob, he's not right in the head. Never was, but I made excuses. Told myself it wasn't my business, helped him anyway. That man who died tonight, one of your ranchers, that blood's on my hands too." Caleb studied him for a long moment. "You're asking for mercy after showing none." "I guess I am. That make me a hypocrite? Makes you human." Caleb turned to Doc Thornton, who'd heard the conversation. "Your call, Doc." Doc grabbed his bag without hesitation. "Take me to him, but understand, I'm doing this for my oath, not for him." As Doc left with Tom Reed, Martha came to stand beside Caleb. "You think it's a trap?" "No. I think Tom Reed finally found his conscience. Happens sometimes, usually too late." The night crawled toward dawn. Caleb sat on the saloon porch, his pocket watch in his hand, winding it mechanically. The watch had belonged to Margaret. She'd given it to him on their 5th anniversary, engraved on the back with the words, "May you always find your way home." For years, he'd thought home was a place, their farm in Missouri, later his cabin in the mountains. Now he was beginning to understand that home might be something else, a purpose, a reason to care, people worth protecting. Doc returned just before sunrise. "Jacob will live, though he'll limp the rest of his days. That bullet shattered his kneecap. He won't be charging anyone again." "Did he say anything?" "Mostly curses. But at the end, when the laudanum started working, he said something strange. He said, 'Sarah was the only good thing I ever had, and I destroyed her like I destroy everything.' Then he passed out." Doc looked tired, ancient. "You know what the sad thing is? I think he actually believes that. In his twisted mind, he loved her. He just didn't know how to love anything without breaking it. That's not love, Martha said quietly. That's possession. That's sickness. As the sun rose, painting Cedar Flats in shades of gold and orange, the town came out to see the damage. The saloon stood, smoke-stained and battle-scarred, but intact. The dead rancher lay in Doc's office, peaceful in death, and his friends stood vigil. Sarah appeared on the saloon balcony, the morning light behind her, and the town looked up at her. This woman who'd been invisible for 2 years, whose suffering they'd ignored, was now the center of everything. She was the reason they'd found their courage, the catalyst that had forced them to become better than they'd been. She raised one hand in a small wave, and people waved back. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. She was no longer alone. She was no longer invisible. She was a member of this community, worth fighting for, worth dying for. Caleb watched the sun rise and thought about the strange turns life takes. 3 days ago, he'd been planning to trade his furs and disappear back into the mountains. Now he was part of something bigger, a community finding its soul, a woman finding her strength, a town learning that courage is contagious. His pocket watch ticked in his hand, keeping in perfect time, and he smiled. Margaret had told him he'd find his way home. It had just taken 15 years and a pregnant woman named Sarah to show him where home actually was. Not a place, not a memory, but a choice. The choice to care, to fight, to stand up when it would be easier to walk away. That was home, that was purpose, that was what it meant to be alive again. 2 days passed in uneasy peace. Jacob's men had scattered, most of them slipping out of Cedar Flats entirely, wanting no part of whatever came next. Jacob himself lay in a back room of Doc's office, his legs splintered and bandaged, guarded by volunteers who rotated shifts. He was a prisoner in all but name, waiting for whatever justice would arrive. Sarah was recovering, gaining strength. The baby moved vigorously now, and Doc estimated she had maybe 2 weeks before labor began. The breech position still worried him, but there was nothing to do except wait and prepare. Caleb spent his time helping repair the saloon's damage, standing watch and walking the town. He'd become a familiar sight, this quiet mountain man who'd appeared from nowhere and changed everything. Children waved at him, women nodded respectfully, men shook his hand and called him friend. It felt strange, being part of a community again, good strange, but strange nonetheless. On the morning of the 3rd day, the telegraph operator came running to the saloon, waving a yellow paper. "Mr. Stone, Doc Thornton, you need to see this." The telegram was from Fort Collins, sent by Marshal Clayton Hayes. Caleb read it once, then again, his expression shifting from surprise to something like wonder. "What is it?" Martha demanded. "Timothy made it through," Caleb said. "The marshal received our message. He's coming, should arrive by afternoon." He paused, reading further. "But there's more. The marshal did some investigating. He found something we didn't know." He handed the telegram to Doc, who read it aloud. "Jacob Marston wanted for murder in Kansas. Additional information. First wife Elizabeth Marston filed charges attempted murder before fleeing. Previously believed dead. Recently located in Denver. Willing to testify. Bringing her with me. Arrive approximately 3 p.m. today. Marshal Clayton Hayes." The saloon went silent as everyone absorbed this information. "Jacob's first wife is alive," Martha said slowly. "I thought everyone said she died, that he buried her somewhere up north." "He told everyone she died," Doc said, his voice shaking with anger. "But he tried to kill her, just like he's been trying to kill Sarah. She escaped somehow. She's been alive this whole time." Sarah sank into a chair, her hand on her belly. "There's another woman who went through what I've been going through. Who escaped? Who survived? And who's coming here to help make sure he faces justice," Caleb added. "This changes everything. We don't just have the wanted poster, we have a witness, someone who can testify to Jacob's pattern of violence, his attempts at murder." Combined with what he's done to Sarah, with the attack on the saloon, he's facing the rope for certain now. Word spread through Cedar Flats like wildfire. By noon, the entire town knew that Jacob's first wife was alive and coming with a federal marshal. The mood shifted from anxious waiting to something like anticipation. Justice was coming, real justice, backed by federal authority. But in Doc's back room, Jacob's reaction was very different. When Tom Reed came to tell him the news, feeling he owed the man that much, Jacob's face went white as chalk. "Elizabeth," he whispered. "Elizabeth's alive." "You thought you'd killed her," Tom said. It wasn't a question. Jacob didn't answer directly. Instead, he stared at the ceiling, his eyes unfocused, and began to talk. Perhaps it was the laudanum, loosening his tongue. Or perhaps it was the knowledge that he was doomed, and confession no longer mattered. "I left her in a snowstorm," he said flatly. 3 years ago. She was bleeding from where I'd hit her. I took her horse, took her coat, left her to freeze. When I came back the next day, there was no body. Wolves, I thought. Or she'd crawled somewhere to die. Either way, she was gone, and I was free. Tom Reed felt sick listening to this casual admission of attempted murder. "You're a monster." "I'm a man who wanted what was mine to stay mine," Jacob said. "Elizabeth tried to leave me. Can't let a woman leave. Shows weakness. Then I met Sarah, sweet, grateful Sarah with no family to protect her. Thought I'd do better the second time. But she was weak too. They're all weak. Can't take what's necessary to make them strong." "You're insane," Jacob laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Maybe. Doesn't matter now. Elizabeth's coming and she'll tell them everything. I'll hang. So will you, probably, for helping me." Tom Reed stood up. "I'm done helping you. I'm done making excuses. When that marshal arrives, I'm telling him everything I know. Maybe it'll save my neck, maybe it won't. But at least I'll stop being the man who stood by and let you destroy lives." He walked out, leaving Jacob alone with his demons and his shattered leg. At 3 o'clock precisely, 2 horses appeared on the eastern road. One carried a man in his 50s wearing a marshal's badge, sitting tall in the saddle with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades enforcing law. The other carried a woman. Elizabeth Marston was in her early 30s, dressed in practical traveling clothes, her dark hair pulled back severely from a face that bore the marks of someone who'd survived something terrible. There were old scars on her face, faint now but visible, and her eyes held a wariness that came from hard experience. But there was also strength there. She'd survived Jacob Marston's attempt to murder her. She'd built a new life. And now she was here to ensure he never hurt anyone again. Sarah watched from the saloon window as the 2 riders approached. Martha stood beside her, holding her hand. "That's her," Sarah whispered. "That's the woman who got away. That's the woman who's going to help you stay away," Martha corrected. Marshal Hayes dismounted first, surveying the battle-scarred saloon with experienced eyes. He was a solid man with grey hair and a weathered face that had seen too much violence but hadn't become callous to it. When Caleb came out to meet him, they shook hands like equals. "You'd be Caleb Stone, the mountain man who started all this," Hayes said. "I'm Caleb Stone. I didn't start anything. I just stopped standing by." Hayes nodded approvingly. "Young Timothy gave me quite a report. Brave kid. You trained him well. That's his grandfather's doing, not mine." Elizabeth Marston dismounted more slowly, her movements careful, as if she was still not entirely sure this place was safe. Her eyes swept the town, taking in everything, until they landed on the saloon and on Sarah visible in the second-floor window. Their eyes met across the distance. 2 women connected by the same violent man, by shared trauma and survival. Elizabeth's expression softened, and she raised one hand in a gesture that was part greeting, part acknowledgement, part solidarity. Sarah raised her hand in return, tears streaming down her face. "I'd like to see him," Elizabeth said to the marshal. "I'd like to see Jacob and let him know I'm alive, that I survived, that he failed." "That's your right," Hayes said. "But are you sure?" "Sometimes facing the past again, I've been facing it every day for 3 years, Elizabeth interrupted firmly. But I've been facing it alone, in my memories, where he still has power. Today I face it in reality, where I have the power. Yes, I'm sure. Doc Thornton led them to the back room where Jacob was kept. 2 guards stood aside, and the door opened. Jacob looked up from his cot, saw Elizabeth standing there very much alive, and his face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, rage, and finally something like fear. "Hello, Jacob," Elizabeth said calmly. Surprised. You're dead. You should be dead," Elizabeth finished. "Yes, that was your plan. Leave me in the snow, bleeding and freezing. Take my horse, my coat. Make sure I couldn't get to shelter. You thought I'd be dead by morning. How did I survive?" Elizabeth moved closer, and Jacob actually pressed back against the wall. "A trapper found me, an old Ute man who was checking his lines. He took me to his camp, kept me alive through the pneumonia that followed. When I was strong enough, he guided me to a settlement. I told them my husband had tried to kill me. They helped me disappear, helped me start over in Denver." She pulled out a leather folder from her bag. "I've been documenting everything. Every memory of your violence. Every scar you left. Every broken bone. The doctor in Denver examined me, wrote it all down. And when I heard through the Frontier Gossip Network that you'd married again, that another woman was suffering, I knew I couldn't stay hidden anymore." Jacob's eyes darted between Elizabeth and the marshal. "You can't prove anything. It's her word against mine. Actually," Marshal Hayes said, "I can prove plenty. The wanted poster from Kansas. Your attack on this saloon. Your assault on Sarah Miller, documented by Doc Thornton. Tom Reed's testimony, yes, he's turning witness. And now Elizabeth's testimony, backed by medical evidence." He pulled out handcuffs. "Jacob Marston, you're under arrest for murder, attempted murder, assault, and a host of other charges. You'll be transported to Fort Collins for trial." Jacob's face twisted with rage. "Sarah, I want to see Sarah. She's my wife. She belongs to me." "No," Elizabeth said quietly. "She doesn't. She never did. Neither did I. We're human beings, not property. And it's time you learned that, though I suspect you'll learn it at the end of a rope." Elizabeth turned and walked out, her back straight, her head high. She'd faced her demon and found him diminished, pathetic, powerless. It was the closure she'd needed for 3 years. Upstairs, Sarah waited nervously as Martha guided Elizabeth to her room. When the 2 women finally stood face to face, there was a moment of silence, heavy with shared understanding. "I'm Elizabeth," she said. "You must be Sarah." "I am." I don't know what to say." "Thank you doesn't seem enough. Then don't say anything. Just know you're not alone. You were never alone. You just thought you were, because that's what men like Jacob want us to believe." Sarah touched her belly. "I'm going to have his child." "No," Elizabeth corrected gently. "You're going to have your child. Jacob contributed DNA, but that doesn't make him a father. You're the one carrying that baby, protecting it, fighting for it. That child is yours. I don't know how to move forward. How to build a life after this." Elizabeth smiled, and despite the scars, it transformed her face. "One day at a time. You find work. I'm a school teacher now. You find friends. I found a community of women in Denver who've survived similar things. You discover you're stronger than you knew, and eventually the nightmares fade. Not gone, but quieter. The scars remain, but they become proof that you survived, not reminders of what he did to you. Would you stay? For a while? I could use," Sarah's voice broke. "I could use someone who understands." "I'll stay until after the baby comes," Elizabeth promised. "I'll be here. And afterward, if you want, there's a place for you in Denver. A community of women helping each other heal. A schoolhouse that needs an assistant. A future that doesn't include fear." Sarah sobbed with relief and hope, and Elizabeth held her while she cried. 2 women, different ages, connected by trauma, but building toward healing. Supporting each other in ways men like Jacob would never understand. Downstairs, Marshal Hayes was organizing Jacob's transport. But first, he wanted to understand everything that had happened. He sat with Caleb, Doc, Martha, and the others, taking statements, making notes, piecing together the full story. "You did a remarkable thing here," Hayes told them. "Most towns would have looked away. Most people would have told themselves it wasn't their business." "We did look away," Doc said heavily. "For 2 years we looked away. It took a stranger to show us what we should have done all along." "Don't sell yourselves short," Caleb said. "When it mattered, you stood up. That's what counts." Hayes turned to Caleb. "You planning on staying in Cedar Flats? Seems like they could use a man like you." Caleb looked out the window at the town, this place he'd ridden into just days ago, planning to leave quickly. He thought about Sarah, about the baby that would need protecting as it grew. He thought about the community that had found its courage and might need help maintaining it. He thought about his pocket watch, Margaret's inscription, "May you always find your way home." "I might stay a while," he said. "See how things play out. These mountains aren't going anywhere." That evening, as the sun set over Cedar Flats, the town gathered to witness Jacob's departure. Marshal Hayes had him shackled in a wagon, guarded by armed deputies. Jacob looked diminished now, no longer the terrifying figure who'd controlled through fear. Just a broken man facing justice. As the wagon rolled past, Sarah stood on the saloon balcony with Elizabeth beside her. They watched in silence as Jacob Marston left Cedar Flats for the last time, heading toward a trial and almost certain execution. "Is it wrong that I feel nothing?" Sarah asked quietly. "No satisfaction, no relief. Just emptiness where the fear used to be." "That's not emptiness," Elizabeth said. "That's space. Space where you'll build something new. Something good. Something yours." Sarah touched her belly, felt the baby kick strong and healthy. "Something ours," she corrected and smiled. Caleb watched from below, his hand in his pocket, fingers touching the pocket watch. The dent in its face had caught a bullet fragment during the battle, literally saving his life. He saw it as a sign. Margaret was still with him somehow, still guiding him home, and maybe home was right here, in this scarred but healing town, among these imperfect but courageous people, protecting a woman and child who needed him. Maybe this was where he was meant to be all along. The week following Jacob's departure was the strangest of Caleb's life. For 15 years, he'd lived in solitude, where days blended together, unmarked and unmourned. Now each day had weight and meaning, filled with purpose and people who depended on him. Sarah's pregnancy entered its final stages. Doc Thornton checked her daily, growing increasingly concerned about the breech position. The baby was strong and active, but positioned wrong for a safe delivery. In a city with modern hospitals, it would be manageable. In a frontier town with limited medical equipment, it was dangerous. "I may need to turn the baby," Doc told Caleb and Elizabeth privately. "External cephalic version, it's called. Manipulate the baby through the mother's abdomen to get it into the correct position. It's risky, can cause premature labor, distress the baby. But attempting delivery with a breech presentation is riskier still." "What are Sarah's chances?" Elizabeth asked bluntly. "With the delivery, I mean." Doc was quiet for a moment. "If everything goes perfectly? Good. If there are complications, bleeding, the baby getting stuck, distress—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Caleb felt the old helplessness creeping back, the same feeling he'd had watching Margaret and Emma slip away. "What can we do to improve the odds?" "Prepare. Make sure we have everything we might need. Hot water, clean linens, instruments sterilized. And pray that when the time comes, luck is on our side." Elizabeth spent her days with Sarah, the two women forming a bond deeper than friendship. They were sisters in survival, connected by shared trauma, but more importantly by shared strength. Elizabeth told stories of her new life in Denver, of the teaching work she loved, of the women's community that had given her purpose. "There's a woman named Clara who survived worse than both of us combined," Elizabeth said one afternoon as they sat sewing baby clothes. "Her husband burned down their house with her inside. She escaped through a window, but the fire left scars all over her arms and back. When I first met her, I thought she'd be broken. But she's the strongest person I know. She runs a boarding house now, helps other women escaping bad situations. She taught me that survival is just the beginning. What you do after, that's what defines you." Sarah folded the tiny shirt she'd finished, added it to the growing pile. I want my baby to know strong women, to grow up understanding that you fight for what's right even when it's hard. Then that baby's lucky to have you as a mother." Martha watched the two women with satisfaction. Her saloon had become something of a headquarters for the town's transformation. Women gathered there to plan improvements, a proper school, a community fund to help families in crisis, a formal system for reporting and addressing violence. The shame that had kept Cedar Flats silent was being replaced by determination to be better. Caleb spent his time making preparations of a different kind. His military training, dormant for so many years, reasserted itself. He inventoried medical supplies, identified potential complications, made contingency plans. It felt strange to be planning for childbirth with the same tactical mindset he'd once used for combat operations. But the stakes were just as high. One evening he sat with Doc Thornton. "Going over everything one more time. You can't control everything," Doc said gently. "Childbirth is unpredictable. We can prepare, but ultimately it's in God's hands." "I don't trust God's hands," Caleb said bluntly. "He took my wife and daughter. I trust preparation. I trust having options when things go wrong. And if all the preparation isn't enough?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his hand unconsciously moving to his pocket where the watch rested. "Then at least I'll know I did everything possible. I won't have to live with the regret of not trying." Doc studied him with kind eyes. "You're still trying to save Margaret and Emma, aren't you?" "Through Sarah and her baby, maybe," Caleb admitted. "Or maybe I'm just trying to prove that sometimes the good guys win. That not every story has to end in loss. Life's more complicated than good guys and bad guys. Not this time. This time it's simple. There's a woman who deserves to live, a baby that deserves to be born healthy. And I'm going to make sure both those things happen." 3 days before Sarah's due date, Timothy returned from Fort Collins with news from the marshal. Jacob's trial had been swift. With Elizabeth's testimony, the wanted poster, Tom Reed's statement, and Doc's medical evidence, the verdict was never in doubt. Jacob Marston was sentenced to hang for murder and attempted murder. The execution was scheduled for 2 weeks hence. "Marshal Hayes sent this for you," Timothy said, handing Caleb a letter. "Said you'd want to know." Caleb read it privately. Hayes wrote about the trial, about Jacob's complete lack of remorse, about Elizabeth's powerful testimony. But the last paragraph was personal. "You did more than save 2 lives, Mr. Stone. You reminded a whole town what it means to stand up for what's right. That's a rare thing. I've been marshalling for 20 years, and I've seen too many places where people turn away, where violence goes unchecked because everyone's too scared or too comfortable to act. Cedar Flats will never be that kind of town again, and that's your doing. Be proud of that." Caleb folded the letter and added it to his journal, among the pressed wildflowers and sketches of mountain trails. His life was being documented in new ways now, not just solitude and survival, but connection and purpose. That night, Sarah's water broke. It was 3 in the morning, and Sarah woke to dampness and the beginning of contractions. Elizabeth, sleeping in a chair beside the bed, was immediately alert. "It's time," Sarah said, her voice tight with pain and fear. "It's time," Elizabeth confirmed, and went to wake Martha. Within 15 minutes, Doc Thornton was there, Caleb close behind. The room that had been Sarah's sanctuary for weeks was transformed into a delivery room. Hot water, clean linen, sterilized instruments. Everything they'd prepared. Doc examined Sarah quickly. 4 centimeters dilated, early labor. Could be hours yet. The baby's still breech, so I need to try turning it now, before labor progresses too far. Will it hurt? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Yes. I'm sorry, but yes. Elizabeth, I need you to hold Sarah's hand. Talk to her, keep her focused on you. Caleb, Martha, I need you to help position her and be ready if I need assistance. What followed was one of the hardest things Caleb had ever watched. Doc worked carefully but firmly, his hands pressing against Sarah's swollen belly, trying to manipulate the baby into the correct position. Sarah cried out, her face contorted with pain, gripping Elizabeth's hand so hard her knuckles went white. I know, Elizabeth whispered. Breathe with me, Sarah. In and out. You're stronger than this. You've survived worse. This is bringing life, not ending it. Focus on that. Doc worked for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, he stepped back, his face grim. I can't get it to turn. The baby's stubborn, or the umbilical cord might be preventing movement. We're going to have to deliver breech. The room went silent except for Sarah's labored breathing. What does that mean? Sarah gasped. It means it's going to be harder, more dangerous. The baby's feet or bottom will come first instead of the head. The head is the largest part, and if it gets stuck, Doc didn't finish. We'll do everything we can, but I need you to know it's going to be difficult. Sarah looked at Caleb, at Elizabeth, at Martha. You'll all stay? No matter what happens. Every step of the way, Martha promised. Until it's done, Elizabeth confirmed. Caleb met Sarah's eyes and saw fear there, but also determination. The same determination that had made her stab Bulmaki, that had made her choose freedom over familiar suffering. I'll be right here, he said simply. You're not alone. The hours that followed tested everyone's strength. Labor progressed slowly, painfully. Sarah endured contractions that seemed to tear her apart. Elizabeth never left her side, coaching her through breathing, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. Caleb stood ready with whatever Doc needed. His military training kicking in. Follow orders, stay calm, be prepared for anything. But inside he was terrified. Every cry of pain from Sarah reminded him of Margaret's final days. Every moment brought the possibility of losing someone else he'd come to care about. Around noon, Doc announced that Sarah was fully dilated. Time to push. This is the hard part. The baby's going to come feet first, then the body, and finally the head. That last part is critical. If the head gets stuck, we'll have only minutes to free it before the baby suffocates. Just tell me what to do, Sarah said through gritted teeth. Push when I tell you. Rest when I tell you. Trust me completely. What followed was a battle, not between people, but between life and death. Between a woman's will to bring her child safely into the world and all the physical complications that threatened to prevent it. Sarah pushed with everything she had. Sweat poured down her face. She screamed until her voice went hoarse. Elizabeth held her hand and cried with her, two women bound by shared pain and shared strength. I can see the feet, Doc announced. Good, Sarah, good. Keep pushing. Slowly, agonizingly, the baby began to emerge. Tiny feet, then legs, then the torso. But then progress stopped. The baby's arms were caught, positioned wrong. Doc? Caleb said quietly, seeing the concern on the doctor's face. The arms are pinned against the body. I need to work them free without damaging them. Sarah, don't push for a moment. Just breathe. Doc worked with careful precision, his fingers manipulating the tiny arms, freeing them one at a time. Finally, they came loose, and the baby slid further out but stopped again. The head was still inside. Sarah, I need you to push harder than you ever have, Doc said urgently. Right now. Everything you've got. Sarah gathered her strength, drew on reserves she didn't know she had, and pushed. Caleb saw her face go purple with effort, saw blood, too much blood, and felt his heart seize with fear. Again, Doc commanded, now! Sarah pushed, and the baby's head finally emerged. Doc caught the tiny body, cleared the airway quickly, and for a terrible moment there was only silence. No cry, no movement. Just a small, blue-tinged body that wasn't breathing. No, Elizabeth whispered. No, no, no. Doc moved with practiced speed, turning the baby face down, clearing the mouth more thoroughly, then turning it back up and breathing gently into the tiny nose and mouth. Once, twice, 3 times. Still nothing. Caleb felt time slow down. This was the moment he dreaded. The moment when all the preparation wasn't enough, when death claimed another innocent despite everyone's best efforts. He thought of Margaret. He thought of Emma. He thought of 15 years of guilt and grief. And he thought of Sarah, who'd endured so much, fought so hard, only to lose her child at the last possible moment. Doc breathed into the baby's mouth again, pressed gently on the tiny chest, breathed again, and the baby coughed, sputtered, and then released a thin, reedy cry that was the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard. The blue tinge faded to pink. The cry grew stronger. Doc wrapped the baby quickly, keeping it warm, and handed the crying infant to Sarah. "You have a daughter," Doc said, his voice thick with emotion. "A healthy baby girl." Sarah took her daughter with trembling hands, looked down at the tiny face, and burst into tears. Elizabeth cried too, overcome with relief and joy. Martha wiped her eyes discreetly. Even Doc had to pause to compose himself. Caleb stood back, watching this moment of pure life, and felt something break open in his chest. 15 years of grief, of guilt, of believing that the world was only loss and pain. It all cracked apart, and through the cracks came light. He reached into his pocket and touched his watch. The dented, stopped watch that had literally saved his life days ago. And he wound it carefully, deliberately, setting it to the correct time for the first time in 15 years. It was time to stop living in the past. Time to embrace the present with all its pain and joy and possibility. Sarah looked up from her daughter and met Caleb's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for giving us this chance." "You gave yourselves the chance," Caleb replied. "I just helped clear the way." The baby, unnamed yet but already loved beyond measure, nursed at her mother's breast. She'd been born into a world that was still hard, still dangerous, still full of pain. But she'd also been born into a world where people stood up for each other, where courage could be found even in the most ordinary hearts, where one man's choice to not walk away could change everything. Outside, the sun was setting over Cedar Flats. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles. But tonight, there was only this, a woman and her newborn daughter surrounded by people who loved them, safe and alive and home. Caleb burst through the shattered door just as Jacob reached the back room. The big man with the axe turned to meet him, swinging the weapon in a deadly arc. Caleb ducked under it, feeling the blade whistle past his head, and drove his shoulder into the man's midsection. They crashed into the wall together. The big man was stronger, but Caleb was faster and more experienced. He drove his knee up into the man's groin, then his elbow into the man's throat. The axe clattered to the floor, but Jacob was through the doorway now, moving toward where he could hear his daughter crying. Sarah stood in front of the root cellar door, her hands empty but her stance defiant. "She's mine," Jacob snarled. "My daughter. You can't keep her from me." "She's not yours," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her terror. "She's mine. I carried her. I brought her into this world. I'll die before I let you touch her." Jacob raised his gun, pointing it at Sarah's chest. "Then die." But before he could pull the trigger, Elizabeth appeared from the shadows beside the root cellar door. She'd been waiting, baby Margaret carefully hidden below. In her hands was Sarah's partially finished baby blanket, the one Jacob had thrown in the dirt weeks ago, now cleaned and completed by loving hands. "Jacob," Elizabeth said quietly, drawing his attention. "Remember me?" Jacob's head whipped toward her, his eyes going wide with shock and something like fear. You're dead. I killed you." "You tried," Elizabeth said. She stepped forward, holding the blanket like a shield, and Jacob actually stepped back. "You left me to die in the snow, but I survived. I survived, and I built a life without you. A good life. A free life." She took another step forward, and Jacob retreated again. The gun in his hand wavered. "You know what I learned, Jacob? I learned that you're nothing. You're not powerful. You're not feared. You're just pathetic. A broken man who could only feel big by making others feel small. And even that didn't work. We're still here. We survived you. We're stronger because of what you put us through." "Shut up!" Jacob screamed and aimed the gun at Elizabeth, but Sarah had been moving while Elizabeth distracted him. She'd retrieved something from behind the door, a heavy iron poker used for the stove. As Jacob's finger tightened on the trigger, Sarah swung it with all her strength, catching him across the wounded knee. Jacob's scream was inhuman. He dropped the gun and collapsed, clutching his shattered leg. The poker had broken the barely healed kneecap completely. He rolled on the floor, writhing in agony. In the main room, Caleb had finished with the big man, left him unconscious and bleeding on the floor. He rushed into the back room to find Sarah standing over Jacob, the poker still in her hands, breathing hard. "Sarah," Caleb said gently, "it's done." You can put that down now. Sarah looked at the poker in her hands, at Jacob writhing on the floor, and the reality of what she'd done hit her. She dropped the weapon and stumbled backward right into Elizabeth's arms. I hurt him, Sarah whispered. I wanted to hurt him. Good, Elizabeth said fiercely. He deserved it. He deserved worse, and you defended yourself and your daughter. There's no shame in that. From the root cellar, baby Margaret was still crying. Sarah rushed to her, lifted her from where Elizabeth had hidden her in a basket of clean linens, and held her close. The baby quieted immediately, sensing her mother's presence. Outside, the sounds of fighting had stopped. The fire in the abandoned shack was being extinguished. Pete Dawson and the other attackers were captured or dead. The battle was over. Marshal Hayes arrived at dawn, having ridden through the night with 10 armed deputies after hearing that Jacob had escaped. He found Cedar Flats battle-scarred but victorious. Jacob Marston was in custody, his leg destroyed beyond repair. Pete Dawson and the surviving attacker were shackled. The big man with the axe was dead. He'd pulled a knife on Caleb during their fight. And Caleb had been forced to use his Bowie knife in self-defense. Doc Thornton was alive but weak, the bullet removed from his shoulder by Martha, who'd learned more than she'd realized watching him work. He'd survive, though his arm would never be quite the same the town had held. The people who'd found their courage hadn't surrendered it when tested again. And 2 women and a baby were safe, truly safe. For the first time since Jacob Marston had entered their lives, Marshal Hayes stood in Doc's office, looking at Jacob on the floor, still moaning from his shattered knee. He'll hang this time, Hayes said grimly. No chance of escape, no sympathetic juries. What he's done here, attempted murder of multiple people, killing during an escape, attacking a town. There's no question of the verdict. When? Elizabeth asked. Week, maybe 2. We'll transport him to Denver for the trial. Bigger courthouse, better security, and you'll both be there to testify. He looked at Sarah and Elizabeth. Both of you. 2 wives, 2 attempts at murder. The jury will hear everything. Jacob, through his pain, managed to spit out words. You turned her against me. Both of them. They were mine until you... They were never yours, Caleb interrupted quietly. He knelt down beside Jacob, his father's Bowie knife still in his hand. The blade cleaned, but the memory of violence still fresh. People aren't property. Love isn't ownership. You never understood that, and now you'll die not understanding it. He stood and turned away, done with Jacob Marston forever. Sarah sat in the corner, nursing baby Margaret, who'd finally calmed down. Elizabeth sat beside her, one hand on her shoulder. 2 women who'd survived the same monster, who'd helped each other find strength, who'd built something better from the wreckage of their pain. What will you do now? Elizabeth asked Sarah quietly. The offer still stands. Denver, the community, the work. Sarah looked down at her daughter, then around the room at the people who'd fought for them. Caleb standing by the window, Martha bandaging Doc's shoulder, Henry Porter and his sons clearing the debris. All these people who'd found courage, who'd become better versions of themselves. I think, Sarah said slowly, I'll stay in Cedar Flats, at least for now. These people, they're family now. Not the kind you're born into, but the kind you choose. The kind that chooses you back. And later, when Margaret's older, maybe we'll come to Denver then. Let her see what strong women can build together. But for now, this is home, Elizabeth smiled. Then I'll visit often. Very often. That afternoon, as Jacob and his accomplices were loaded into a secure wagon for transport to Denver, the town gathered to watch. Not with celebration. There'd been too much pain, too much loss for that. But with quiet satisfaction. Justice was being served. The wicked were facing consequences, and the vulnerable were protected. Caleb stood apart from the crowd, his hand in his pocket, fingers touching the watch that had literally saved his life. The watch that had been stopped for 15 years, and now ran again, keeping time, marking moments, reminding him that life moved forward. Sarah approached him, baby Margaret asleep in her arms. You're leaving, aren't you? He'd been thinking about it. The mountains called to him, that solitude he'd known for so long. But he'd changed, and what had once been peaceful isolation now felt like running away. Not yet, he said. Maybe not for a while. Town could use someone who knows how to organize defenses, prepare for trouble. And Margaret's going to need someone to teach her about courage when she's old enough, Sarah smiled. She already has the best teacher in the world, her namesake. But having you around wouldn't hurt either. Your Margaret would have liked meeting you, Caleb said quietly. Both of you. She always said, the strongest people are the ones who survive impossible things and stay kind anyway. You're both that kind of strong. Baby Margaret stirred in her mother's arms, yawned, and opened her eyes. For just a moment they focused on Caleb's face, and he felt something shift in his heart. Not a replacement for what he'd lost. Nothing could replace Margaret and Emma, but a new connection, a new purpose, a new reason to be part of the world, instead of hiding from it. The wagon carrying Jacob rolled out of town, heading for justice. Elizabeth stood beside Sarah, the two survivors watching their tormentor leave their lives forever. Martha stood with Doc, supporting him as his wounded shoulder healed. Henry Porter and the other defenders stood proud, men who'd discovered they were braver than they'd known. And Caleb Stone, the mountain man who'd ridden into town planning to stay one night, looked around at this community he'd helped save and realized he was exactly where he needed to be. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, always did. But tomorrow would also bring another day of Sarah and baby Margaret living free, of a town that had learned to stand up for what's right, of ordinary people who discovered they were capable of extraordinary courage. Caleb took out his journal that evening and wrote by lamplight. He wrote about the final battle, about Sarah's courage, about the strange satisfaction of seeing justice served. But mostly he wrote about hope, how it can be lost and found again, how it can survive even the darkest times, how it can grow from the smallest seeds of kindness and courage. He ended with words for Margaret and Emma. Wherever they might be, I found my way home just like you promised I would. It wasn't the home I expected, but maybe that's the point. Home is where you find purpose, where you matter to people and they matter to you. I'm home now. Thank you for guiding me here. He closed the journal, wound his watch carefully, and prepared for sleep. Through his window, he could see lights in other homes, families settling in for the night. A town at peace, at least for now. And in Doc's office, Sarah held her daughter and sang softly, a lullaby her own mother had sung to her long ago. Little Margaret listened, safe and warm and loved, growing up in a world that was hard, but also full of people willing to fight for what's right. The baby blanket Elizabeth had held during the confrontation lay beside them, clean and bright and finished, a symbol of hope that had survived being trampled, that had been restored by caring hands, that would wrap this child in love as she grew. Sometimes, Caleb thought as he drifted toward sleep, the world gives you second chances. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you get to be part of someone else's second chance. That was enough. More than enough, it was everything. 3 weeks later, word arrived by telegram from Denver. Jacob Marston had been tried, convicted, and executed for his crimes. The trial had lasted only 2 days. Elizabeth's testimony combined with Sarah's, along with the evidence of his attacks on Cedar Flats and the murders committed during his escape, left no room for doubt or mercy. Sarah received the news while sitting on the porch of Doc's office, baby Margaret sleeping peacefully in her arms. She felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just a quiet relief that it was truly over, that the fear could finally begin to fade. How do you feel? Martha asked, sitting beside her. Empty, Sarah admitted. I thought I'd feel something more, joy or relief or vindication. But I just feel tired, like I've been carrying something heavy for so long, and now that it's gone, I'm not sure what to do with my arms. That's normal, Martha said. You've been surviving for so long, it takes time to learn how to live again. Cedar Flats had changed in the weeks since the final battle. The town that had once turned away from suffering now actively worked to prevent it. They'd formed a community watch, not just for physical safety, but for checking on neighbors, supporting those in need, making sure no one suffered in silence again. A sign had been erected in the town square. carved by Lars the blacksmith, with words chosen by the town council. Cedar Flats Community Watch. In this town, we look after our own. Speak up, stand up. We'll stand with you. It was a promise and a reminder, a declaration that they'd learned their lesson and wouldn't forget it. Doc Thornton's shoulder was healing slowly but surely. He couldn't use his right arm as well as before, but he was learning to compensate. More importantly, he'd regained something he'd thought lost forever: his self-respect. He'd stood up when it mattered, had taken a bullet protecting those under his care, and would carry that knowledge with more pride than pain. "You know what's funny?" he said to Caleb one afternoon. "I was a doctor for 20 years before you came to town. Saved a lot of lives. But I don't think I ever really healed anyone until I finally stood up to Jacob. Because healing isn't just about bodies. It's about souls too. This town's soul was sick, and somehow, standing together, we cured it." Caleb had stayed in Cedar Flats, though he made occasional trips back to his mountain cabin to check on things and bring down more supplies. Each time he returned to town, it felt more like coming home. The solitude he'd once cherished now felt lonely rather than peaceful. He'd spent 15 years running from connection, and now he found himself craving it. He'd taken a room at Martha's saloon permanently and helped around town with whatever needed doing. He taught the younger men tracking and survival skills. He helped Henry Porter improve his farm's efficiency. He stood watch when needed and offered quiet counsel when asked. Young Timothy had become something of an apprentice, following Caleb around and absorbing knowledge like a sponge. The boy who'd ridden to Fort Collins with the message had discovered he was braver than he'd known, and he wanted to learn how to channel that bravery into helping others. "Mr. Stone," Timothy asked one day, "what makes someone a hero? Is it not being afraid?" "No," Caleb replied. "Heroes are afraid all the time. What makes them heroes is they act anyway. They see something wrong and choose to make it right, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. Like when you rode to Fort Collins. You were scared, but you went anyway." "I was terrified," Timothy admitted. "Good. That means you understood the stakes. Stupid people aren't afraid because they don't grasp the danger. Brave people are afraid and do it anyway. Remember that." Elizabeth had returned to Denver after Jacob's execution, but visited Cedar Flats monthly. She and Sarah had formed a bond the distance couldn't diminish, writing letters weekly and supporting each other through the continuing process of healing. Elizabeth had brought books for Sarah, had arranged for correspondence courses so Sarah could continue her education while caring for Margaret. "You could teach," Elizabeth told her during one visit. "Cedar Flats needs a proper school. You're educated, you're patient, and you understand hardship. You could help other children, especially girls who need to see that women can be strong and independent." Sarah considered this, looking down at baby Margaret, who was growing quickly and becoming more alert each day. "Maybe when she's a little older. I want to be present for her early years, show her what a loving mother looks like." But yes, eventually teaching sounds right. One evening, as the sun set over Cedar Flats painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Caleb stood on the roof of the saloon with his brass compass in hand. The instrument had guided him through the defense of the town, had helped him coordinate the efforts that saved lives. Now it just pointed north toward his cabin in the mountains, steady and true. He didn't need to go back there anymore. Not to hide, anyway. The mountains would always be there, a place of peace when he needed it. But this was home now, this scarred, imperfect, courageously rebuilding town. Sarah appeared on the street below, baby Margaret swaddled against the evening chill. She'd gained weight, filled out from weeks of proper nutrition and freedom from fear. There was color in her cheeks now, and when she smiled, which she did more often, her whole face transformed. Caleb climbed down to meet her. Margaret was awake, her dark eyes curious, taking in the world with infant wonder. She made a small sound when she saw Caleb, something between a coo and a gurgle that made him smile. "She likes you," Sarah observed. "She doesn't fuss when you hold her, which is rare. Even Doc makes her cry sometimes." "Babies know who they can trust," Caleb said. He let Margaret grip his finger with her tiny hand, marveling at the strength in such a small person. "I've been thinking," Sarah said carefully, "about what you said once, about your wife and daughter, about wanting Margaret to grow up in a world where people help each other, where men like Jacob don't win. I remember, you gave that to her, to us. You changed the world for us, made it safer, better. And I want her to know that. When she's old enough, I want to tell her the full story, not to scare her, but to teach her about courage and standing up for what's right. She'll be proud to learn it," Caleb said. "Though you're the hero of that story, not me. You're the one who survived, who fought, who refused to give up. We're both heroes," Sarah corrected. "All of us. Everyone who stood up when they could have looked away. That's what I want her to understand, that ordinary people doing extraordinary things are what make the world better." As they walked through town, people nodded greetings. Cedar Flats had become a genuine community, no longer a collection of isolated individuals pretending not to see each other's struggles. The woman who'd been invisible for 2 years was now a respected member of society, her daughter celebrated as belonging to everyone. A symbol of the town's redemption. At Martha's saloon, Caleb took out his pocket watch and checked the time. It was working perfectly now, keeping accurate time, the hands moving steadily forward. The dent from the bullet was still there. He'd left it as a reminder that sometimes broken things can still function, can still serve their purpose, can still be valuable. He opened it, looked at the faded photograph of Margaret and Emma. The pain of their loss was still there, would always be there. But it was accompanied now by something else. Gratitude that he'd loved them, pride in the life they'd built together, and satisfaction that their memory had led him to help others. "May you always find your way home," the inscription read. He had found his way home, and home had been worth finding. That night, Cedar Flats settled into peaceful sleep. Sarah in her room above the saloon, baby Margaret beside her in a cradle built by Lars the blacksmith. Martha downstairs, doing accounts and planning improvements to her establishment. Doc in his office, reading medical journals by lamplight. Henry on his farm with his family, secure in his newfound courage. The Hayes brothers, Samuel and Timothy, all the others who'd stood up when it mattered, all of them resting easier, knowing they'd done the right thing. And Caleb Stone, former mountain man, former ghost, now fully alive and part of the world again, sat by his window and wrote in his journal. He wrote about redemption and second chances, about communities finding their conscience, about the power of one person choosing to act. He wrote about Sarah and little Margaret, about their bright futures, about the world they'd helped build. He ended with words for his lost family. "I kept your memory alive by helping others live. I honored your love by loving again, not romantically, but with that fierce, protective care you taught me. You'd like Sarah and baby Margaret. You'd be proud of what we accomplished here. I'll carry you with me always, but I won't hide anymore. Thank you for leading me home. Thank you for setting me free." He closed the journal, wound his watch, and extinguished the lamp. Through his window, the stars shone brilliant and clear over Cedar Flats. The same stars that had watched him grieve in the mountains now watched him heal in community. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new reasons to care and connect and stand up for what's right. But tonight, there was peace. Tonight, there was a woman and her baby sleeping safely. Tonight, there was a town that had learned its lesson and chosen to be better. And tonight, there was a man who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is care, when it would be easier not to. Act when it would be safer to walk away, and choose to be part of the messy, beautiful, difficult business of being human. The watch ticked steadily forward, marking time, measuring moments, reminding him with each second that life goes on. And that going on, truly living rather than merely existing, was worth every risk, every battle, every moment of pain, because in the end, what matters isn't how long you live or how much you accumulate or how perfectly you avoid suffering. What matters is whether you helped someone, whether you stood up when you could have walked away, whether you made the world just a little bit better for having been in it. Caleb Stone had done that. A mountain man who'd ridden into town planning to stay one night, had stayed long enough to change everything, had given 2 lives a chance they wouldn't have had otherwise, had reminded an entire community what it meant to care. That was enough. More than enough. It was legacy. It was purpose. It was home. And somewhere, he liked to think, Margaret and Emma were proud.